Hello everyone, it's Fred again from Notes of a Nomad, video number 97. This time it's a little bit different than previous. I'm using different technology. I came across a DVD that I have, and I don't have much of a DVD player, and I found one of my computers does have that, so I'm going to convert some of the contents of this DVD. This is my first attempt at the first part of the video, and if it works, I'll do some subsequent videos again doing the same technology. So this is all a bit new to me, but I want to convert this so that maybe my future ancestors might be able to say, oh, that's what happened in 1971 when I traveled from South Africa, spent some vacation time with my family, who my wife Gail, who was I believe 25, my son Dominic, who was 4, my daughter Samantha, who was 2, and we traveled across Canada. My parents, this part of the video shows when my parents went with us from Vancouver all the way to Thunder Bay. It was interesting times. It was early spring, so there was still a lot of snow on the ground. And I'm not sure how interesting this will be to some people, but it's a video that will disappear if I don't do something with it. And putting it on YouTube means it'll be around probably for decades. So here we go. Enjoy it as much as you can. And at this point in time, I'll say bye for now. Adios. Watch the video, and I won't say this at the end, so wishing you, your family, and friends lots of love and laughter. And bye for now until next time. As I said earlier, this was the movie that I made on Super 8. This was the car that I bought for $100, a Volkswagen Beetle. And it is the trip from, this part is from the trip from Vancouver all the way to Thunder Bay across the prairies. My father's car was in his car with my mother, following us as we went, and I had Gail, my wife, who was I think 25, my son who's 4, Dominic, and my daughter Samantha, who was 2. That's my dad's car, Volkswagen station wagon pulling a tent trailer. There's Dominic in the back, and there's Gail getting into the car. You'll see a lot of these signs, and if you're interested, you can always stop the video and read them. But this was talking about going up the Fraser River Valley to go to the caribou and to the gold fields. And you'll see a few of these signs that I've taken pictures of describing what it was like in the early days in the history. That's my dad getting out of his car. We had stopped at Sailor Bar Tunnel, and where I was taking some pictures of the trains and the road and the river. The Fraser River being the main river flowing from north to south and for a long way north anyway into British Columbia. So it was the main method of people traveling in the early days getting up to the gold rush. And this describes a little bit about the Fraser River and the railroads and the tunnels, and it's still a challenge today. Uh, Recently there was floods that's caused some of the roads to be stopped. A lot of fish spawn up the river. A lot of salmon come from the ocean, and this is one part of the river where they have built a ladder so that the fish can go different levels because the water is too difficult for them to get past that particular portion. And you will see that we entered into the interior of British Columbia, which is called the caribou. And there's a lot of farming and ranching going on in this part of the world. And this talks about how some of the travels, the stagecoach travels that were available in the early days going up to Barkerville, where we ended up as well, which was one of the main gold mining areas of the early days of the gold rush in British Columbia. Of course, the still snow. It was early or getting late spring, early spring, I guess. Some of the places are still frozen, but the snow was melting. As you can see, as I mentioned, there's a lot of cattle and horses in the interior. As we drove, we stayed in inexpensive motels. I remember the motels were like $10 or $15 in those days. Another sign about going up the gold fields and the mule trains and the oxen wagons and etc. How people made their way up northern British Columbia to the gold fields. In fact, there was some boats on the Fraser River that said they could travel 400 miles from Soda Creek up to the north to the Caribou gold fields. There's also, this was a sawmill, and they were burning the sawdust there. That's where the smoke was coming from. And this was one of the main areas of mining, Barkerville. And it's now a area where you can go and visit. It's like a park, and with some of the historic buildings still around. And you can visit during summer. You can see this was not summer, and there was still snow as we got up further north. There's Gail climbing down the snowbank, which I don't think she had seen snow in her life before she came to Canada to visit my parents. And these are some of the buildings in Barkerville we were looking at. You note my dad's sweater. It's a Cowichan Indian sweater which he had knitted for him, which is on the west coast, very famous and expensive sweaters that the First Nations people knit. And on Vancouver Island is Cowichan, and it's called Cowichan. They were the ones who did a lot of the knitting, and it had fish on it. My dad was an avid fisherman, which I think I explained in a previous video. So these are still some more pictures of Barkerville and us exploring it. There's my mother with her fur hat on, Gail, and my dad. And you can see how much snow was still on the side of the roads. Wells was a small mining town as well near Barkerville. So that's what Barkerville looked like in 1971. It is, I think, enhanced a lot. I recall there was in 2017 when I went up to the Caribou, there were people from Barkerville who were putting on stage shows, and they came down where I was at 100 Mile House when I was helping evacuees during the fires, and they put on a show, which they now do normally in Barkerville, but because of the fires they had come down to 100 Mile House, and they put on a show to raise some money for the evacuees. Now we're in Prince George, which is probably as far north as we went. And that's approximately halfway up British Columbia. This is where there are pulp and paper mills. It's probably one of the main industries in Prince George, and it's still on the Fraser River. There's a picture of the pulp and paper mill, or one of them. In fact, I think there's another one next to this one, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it's a sawmill, but it looks like a... Now this is the Yellowhead route, which is now heading east towards the Rocky Mountains. So now we headed up north to Prince George, and from there we're going on Highway 16, the Yellowhead Highway, into the Rockies. Lots of rivers, lots of trees, lots of mountains, as you can see. one of the many rivers. It might even still been the Fraser River. Oh, this one was Goat River. And there's the $100 car. So I stop quite often to take pictures with my Super 8 camera. You'll notice, obviously, 1971, the cars were 1970, 1960 vintage. Forestry is big industry in British Columbia. As you can see, there's lots of trees. And of course, more mountains. We're not in the Rocky Mountains yet. And this mentions the 800-mile migration of salmon from the Pacific Ocean. Imagine the fish swimming for that distance to go and spawn so they can have more fish. And of course, fishing is a big part of the industry, particularly in those days. Nowadays, it is struggling compared to the old days. But the fish come all this way to spawn, so there will be another generation of fish for I guess the fishermen to catch. Now we're getting into the Rockies. So 12,972 feet tall Mount Robson. We will see some more pictures of the Rockies, and we're now entering to the province of Alberta. And these are some pictures of the Rocky Mountains in Banff and Jasper National Park. I just mentioned that when I was in South Africa, I got homesick many years after this. There was an advertisement in the movie theater, and they showed pictures of the Rocky Mountains. When I saw that, it hit me. Oh, do I miss Canada when I saw the Rocky Mountains in this movie theater in South Africa. That was the first time I really got homesick, when I saw the pictures in South Africa on the movie theater. It was many years after this. So for those of you who have been to the Rockies in Canada, you may recognize some of these, but again, this was over 50 years ago, so some of it's changed. In fact, the size of the glaciers have been reduced, mainly, I guess, due to what we call climate change. Oh, we met some mountain goats. You can see how they can just climb on the side of the hills. And a lot of people stopped, and I guess you weren't supposed to feed animals, but we were doing that as well as everyone else. In those days, they didn't have signs saying do not feed the animals, or I didn't see any anyway. Nowadays, it's frowned upon. But that's where the mountain goats came onto the road and found, including our car, maybe something to eat. So there's, I think you can see just Samantha, who is 2 years old, poking her head out, and Dominic as well, feeding some of the mountain goats. First we were in Jasper, which is the park north, and now going a bit south to Banff National Park. Again, still lots of snow and ice, even though it was, well, early spring. My dad's car, my car, followed by my dad's car, still pulling that trailer. Well, the weather wasn't very conducive to camping outside in a tent trailer, not with all the snow on the ground. It's my dad, and that was Gail previous to that. And this is one of the glaciers in Banff National Park. I think in one of the videos that I showed previously, Notes of a Nomad, I showed one later trip in the 2008 when we went up on the glacier on the big vehicles that they have. Again, lots of ice and snow. Boathouse. This, I believe, was in the hotel in Lake Louise. Now we're leaving the Rockies and heading across the prairies. You'll see it's sort of rolling and then gets flatter and flatter as we leave the mountains, and you will note some oil wells, particularly in Alberta, a little bit in Saskatchewan, which is the next province, some cattle farming, and some grain elevators, because there's a lot of wheat and rye and barley, etc., flaxseed grown on the prairies. And there's an example of an oil well pumping oil back in 1971. Again, this is in Alberta. And my dad getting out of his car because I kept stopping and taking pictures. The oil industry is still very big in Alberta. Of course, now with climate change, the big challenge is what are they going to do with all of the oil and tar sands that they have, very big billion-dollar projects. And of course, this type of energy is now being reduced or attempt to be reduced, but there's very big business in the province of Alberta. So there's a big challenge on what they're going to do. Of course, some people say stop it. Others say we cannot. It's our basis of our economy in this particular province. So a lot of challenges. But this was again in the 1970s. Bow River Pipelines Limited, Medicine Hat. We're now getting close to Saskatchewan now, the fact that we're in the town of Medicine Hat. City of Industry, natural gas, made our city, can't read the last word there. And So you get these signs. This was a Northwest Mounted Police person who was shot near this particular area. And of course, grain elevators. These now, you won't find many of these left, not in this shape anyway. But these are the older style of grain elevators. So you can see different companies had their own grain elevators. My father worked for Saskatchewan Wheat Pool, which I mentioned in a previous video. So now we're entering Saskatchewan, the next province to Alberta. My father looked like he didn't want to be in the video. But you see it's relatively flat, and this goes for thousands of kilometers. The roads are straight, and then take a little curve, then go straight for another many miles, and then again lots of farming, ranching. Here's a train going that I took a picture of or a video of. You'll notice how long it is. Being flat, they can put a lot of carriages and box cars and flat cars on the train. So trains on the prairies are very, very long. This being an example of one. One time I counted them. I don't know, it was over 100, I think, but I can't remember. Of course, even though we're in Saskatchewan, there's still oil in some places there. Not as much in Alberta, but they also have oil. But wheat farming and grain farming is very important, so lots and lots of grain elevators from the different companies in every town. And there's mining as well in Saskatchewan, big potash mines. And this was a sulfate mine, if I'm not mistaken. I think they see a sign indicating what they were mining. But some of the biggest potash mines in the world are in Saskatchewan. And Dominic, sodium sulfate. Okay. And we're traveling on the Trans-Canada Highway. We're going to Regina, where the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have their training college. So we visited that, saw some of the vehicle. That's a RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police car, but we saw some of the students marching. This is the college for the RCMP. And there's some of the trainees marching for them. And one night we decided, oh, it's warm enough to sleep in the tent trailer. So we tried it. Gail, poking her head out, realized it snowed overnight. The car and the tent trailer was full of snow, or covered with snow. So that was unexpected. We found everything was white that night. Now we're entering Manitoba. My father again throwing some snow at us, and he was smoking a pipe. which I remember him doing. I didn't realize he still smoked a pipe in 1971. When I was young, I remember. So this is Manitoba wheat pool and town of Hargrave. This is the garbage containers they had in Manitoba called the Orbit. Throw your garbage into Orbit. And then we entered northern Ontario, which is getting close to Thunder Bay, where this particular video ends. So Sioux Narrows is on Lake of the Woods, which is really just on the border of Manitoba and Ontario. Now we're into what they call the Canadian Shield. So there's a lot of lakes, a lot of rivers. So, and of course, bridges over the lakes and rivers. Again, it's still a lot of ice. And we even got some more snow. And this is called the Voyager route. It's still Trans-Canada, but I believe it's a subsidiary, not the main route. The Atlantic watershed, all the water goes to the Atlantic from this side, and on the other side it goes to the Arctic up to, and now we're in Thunder Bay. Why are you taking a picture of me in the washroom? It says Thunder Bay, London, England's 4,300 miles, etc. Still a long way. Winnipeg's about halfway, so we're just over halfway. Now we're in Thunder Bay. These are the big grain elevators. My dad used to work on these in Thunder Bay until we got transferred in 1956 from Thunder Bay to help open up the Saskatchewan wheat pool grain terminal in Vancouver. And if there's a picture in the background, and what I'm zooming in on is called the Sleeping Giant. It's a peninsula in Lake Superior. And now we're on a boat. First time and only time I ever was on a boat in Lake Superior that I can recall. And this, I believe, was my Uncle Frank driving my father's brother, driving his boat. And he was a boating person. I remember he used to race boats. And I used to go and watch him race his boat when I was young. Obviously a lot of forestry. This is probably going to the pulp and paper mills. So these are what we saw, lighthouse, etc. in Lake Superior. And Thunder Bay was called the Lakehead because these were the ships would come up this far up the St. Lawrence Seaway.